The engines hadn't even cooled when she appeared, a little girl, barefoot, covered in dust, running down the highway with tears streaming down her face. "Please, they're hurting my mom," she cried. Every biker stopped cold. The laughter died, the world went quiet, and for the first time in a long time, the Hells Angels weren't riding for themselves. They were riding for her. What happened next would silence an entire crowd and change how people saw them forever. If you're part of the Black Visionaries family, hit that subscribe button and stay till the end, because this story will remind you that real strength isn't in the roar of an engine. It's in the courage to stand up when no one else does. The desert sun was dying, sinking behind a horizon painted in gold and dust. A long, empty highway stretched through the heart of Arizona, the air thick with heat and silence. In the distance, the deep rumble of Harley-Davidsons broke through the calm, a storm of engines, leather, and grit. The Hells Angels had been riding since dawn, chasing the horizon like it owed them something. As the sun dipped low, they pulled into a small roadside diner, the kind of place where the coffee never ran out and the walls smelled of old stories. The men stepped off their bikes, heavy boots crunching against gravel. They were rough, loud, tattooed, and every head inside turned when they walked in. These were men the world had judged long before ever knowing their names. Inside, the air buzzed with laughter and low conversation. Reaper, the leader, sat at the counter, a man built like iron, with gray in his beard and eyes that carried too many memories. To most, he looked untouchable. But inside, something human still lived quietly, a piece of his heart he buried years ago when tragedy had taken his wife and little girl in a car crash. That wound had never healed. It had only gone silent. The evening was calm. Outside, the desert breeze danced with the last light of the sun. But then, something changed. From the far end of the highway came the sound of footsteps, tiny, desperate ones. The kind that didn't belong in a place like this. A little girl, no older than 7, appeared from the dust, running barefoot down the road. Her hair was tangled, her yellow dress torn and streaked with dirt. She stumbled once, scraped her knee, but didn't stop. Tears streamed down her face as she gasped for breath, clutching her small hands to her chest. "Help!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Please, they're hurting my mom." The laughter inside the diner died instantly. Heads turned toward the window. Reaper was the first to move. He stepped outside, his boots echoing against the pavement. The other bikers followed, confused, cautious, unsure what they were about to face. The girl stopped in front of them, shaking, her chest heaving. Her eyes were wide, filled with the kind of fear that only comes from seeing something no child should ever see. Reaper knelt down slowly, his leather jacket creaking as he spoke in a low, steady tone. "Hey there, kid. You okay?" She shook her head violently, sobbing. "He's hurting my mom. Please, please come." Reaper's jaw tightened. "Who's hurting her?" "My dad," she whispered. "He's drunk again. I tried to stop him, but her voice broke into tears." Reaper looked up at his brothers, rough men who'd seen more violence than most soldiers, but none of them said a word. One of them muttered, "We ain't cops," but Reaper's glare silenced him. "Where?" he asked the girl. She pointed toward the woods behind the diner, where a dirt trail disappeared into the dark. Reaper stood. "Let's go." In seconds, helmets were pulled on, engines roared to life, and the ground trembled beneath the sound of 20 bikes taking off at once. The little girl sat in the sidecar of Reaper's bike, clutching the handlebars as her tears dried into streaks of dust. The night wind whipped through her hair. The engines howled behind them like a promise. When they reached the trailer, the scene was worse than any of them expected. The front door hung open. Inside, the sound of shouting and crashing filled the air. Reaper signaled his men to stay quiet. Then he kicked the door in. The inside smelled like beer and sweat. A man stood over a woman, his fist drawn back, his face twisted with rage. Before he could strike again, Reaper's hand clamped around his wrist like steel. Don't, Reaper said. Just one word, but it hit like thunder. The man turned, furious. Who the hell are you? He never finished the sentence. A second later, he was slammed against the wall, Reaper's forearm pressing into his throat. Another biker grabbed him, twisting his arm behind his back while the others surrounded the woman to make sure she was okay. The little girl ran inside, throwing herself into her mother's arms. The woman's face was bruised, her eyes glassy from tears and fear. She held her daughter tight, whispering over and over, "You're safe now, baby. You're safe." Reaper looked down at the man he'd pinned. "You ever touch them again," he said, voice low and steady, "you'll answer to us." The man tried to spit out an insult, but Reaper shoved him into a chair and motioned for one of the bikers to call the cops. For 10 long minutes, the Angels stood guard over the trailer, silent, powerful, unmovable. When the police finally arrived, they looked uneasy at first. The sight of Hell's Angels standing outside a rural home wasn't one that usually meant peace. But tonight was different. The bikers said nothing. They simply stepped aside as the officers took the man away. The woman, still trembling, tried to stand. Reaper offered her his jacket, the one patched with his club's emblem, and draped it gently around her shoulders. She looked up, her voice shaking. Why would you help us?" Reaper hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering to the little girl. "Because someone didn't help mine," he said quietly. The mother didn't know what that meant, but she didn't need to. The little girl walked up to Reaper, clutching a small stuffed teddy bear she had picked up from the floor. It was missing one ear. She held it out to him shyly. "This is all I have," she said. "You can keep it." Reaper knelt again, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he pushed it back toward her. "No," he said. "You hold on to it. You'll need it more than me." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small silver chain, a cross that once belonged to his daughter, and placed it around her neck. "But you keep this," he said. "It'll remind you that not all angels have wings." The girl looked at it, eyes wide. "Are you an angel?" she asked softly. Reaper smiled faintly. "Not the kind they talk about," he said. "But I try." The bikers stood around quietly, watching as the police led the drunk man away and the mother and daughter sat on the steps under a blanket. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the chrome of their Harleys. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind that said everything words couldn't. When it was time to leave, the little girl ran after Reaper, calling out, "Wait." She hugged his leg tightly. "Thank you." Reaper froze, his hand hovering awkwardly over her head before he finally placed it there, patting gently. "Take care of your mom, okay?" "I will," she whispered. As the Hells Angels rode off into the desert night, the wind carried the faint sound of the girl's voice behind them, a thank you whispered into the stars. Back at the diner, nobody spoke when the bikers returned. The waitress just poured them fresh coffee and left it on the counter. The world had always seen them as outlaws, untouchable, untamed, dangerous. But that night, everyone in that small town saw something different. Not monsters, not rebels, just men who refused to look away when it mattered. Reaper sat in silence, staring out at the dark horizon. The engines cooled, the laughter didn't return. He reached into his pocket and touched the empty space where his daughter's necklace used to be. For the first time in years, he didn't feel haunted. He felt at peace. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come from apologies or prayers. Sometimes it comes from doing the one thing you never expected, the right thing. And that night, when people whispered about the Hells Angels, their voices were different, softer, respectful. Because no one forgot the night a little girl ran to the bikers crying, "They're hurting my mom." And the Hells Angels answered. Not with words, but with silence and heart.